Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. The Watchers. I woke up to find my bedroom ceiling covered in writing that wasn't there before. It said, "They're watching you," in a handwriting that resembled my own. For a moment, I was convinced I was still dreaming. My name is Ethan, and I'm not the type to scare easily. But seeing those words, written in what looked like my own hand, sent a chill down my spine. I rubbed my eyes, hoping the writing would disappear. It didn't. The letters remained, a haunting declaration that felt like a direct violation of my personal space. I got out of bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How could someone have done this without waking me up? And why use my handwriting? I considered the possibility of a prank, but my apartment was secure, and I lived alone. My heart pounded in my chest as I ran through the possibilities. Sleepwalking? But I had never sleepwalked in my life. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. After a quick shower to clear my head, I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the writing. Maybe I could analyze it more later, or show it to someone who could help. I decided to talk to my neighbor, Mrs. Donovan, an elderly woman who had lived in the building for decades. She knew everything that happened here. She might have seen something. "Good morning, Ethan," she greeted me warmly as I knocked on her door. "What brings you here so early?" "Morning, Mrs. Donovan. I was wondering if you saw or heard anything unusual last night. Someone might have entered my apartment." Her expression shifted from warmth to concern. "No, dear. I didn't hear anything. Are you all right?" I hesitated, then showed her the photo on my phone. This was on my ceiling when I woke up. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my. Ethan, that's very disturbing. Are you sure it's your handwriting?" "It looks just like it," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "But I didn't write it. At least, I don't remember doing it." Mrs. Donovan looked around as if expecting someone to be listening. "Ethan, I don't want to scare you, but strange things have happened in this building before. I've heard stories from other tenants about unexplained occurrences. Doors opening on their own, whispers in the night. This building has a history." Her words didn't do much to calm my nerves. "What do you mean? What kind of history?" She lowered her voice. "There are rumors that this place is haunted. Some say it's the spirits of those who lived here long ago, others think it's something more sinister. Whatever it is, it doesn't seem to like people living here." I thanked her and left, feeling more unnerved than before. Haunted? I didn't believe in ghosts. But as I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was indeed watching me. The day passed in a blur of paranoia. Every creak, every shadow seemed to hold a hidden menace. By the time night fell, I was exhausted but too afraid to sleep. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling where the message had been, I heard a soft whisper. "Ethan." The voice was faint but unmistakable. It was coming from the corner of my room. My blood ran cold as I turned to look, my heart pounding in my chest. There was nothing there. I sat up, eyes wide in the darkness, waiting for something, anything to happen. Then, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, just beyond the reach of the moonlight. It moved slowly toward me, and as it did, the whispering grew louder. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the figure was saying the same words over and over, "They're watching you." Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. I bolted upright in bed, heart racing. The shadowy figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me alone in the silence of my bedroom. The whispers had stopped, but their chilling echo lingered in my mind. I turned on the lights, hoping to chase away any remaining darkness. Sleep was impossible now. I spent the rest of the night with every light in my apartment on, pacing the floors, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare. By dawn, exhaustion finally took over, and I dozed off on the couch. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the windows, momentarily easing my fear. But the memory of the shadow and the whispers was still vivid. I needed answers. I couldn't continue living in a state of perpetual fear. First, I decided to investigate the history of the building. If there were rumors, there had to be some truth to them. I made my way to the local library, hoping to find old records or newspaper clippings about the building. The librarian, a kind woman named Clara, was more than willing to help. She led me to the archives and left me with a stack of dusty old newspapers and documents. Hours passed as I sifted through them, uncovering a dark history I hadn't anticipated. The building had been constructed in the early 1900s and was originally a boarding house. It had changed ownership several times over the decades, each owner reporting strange occurrences. In the 1960s, there was a string of mysterious disappearances. Tenants vanished without a trace, and the authorities never found any leads. The place had earned a reputation for being cursed, but the stories faded over time as new residents moved in, oblivious to its past. Among the documents, I found a photograph of a man named Samuel Grady, one of the original owners. His stern face seemed to follow me, his eyes piercing through the yellowed paper. According to the records, he had been obsessed with the occult and conducted bizarre rituals in the basement. When he disappeared, rumors spread that he had summoned something he couldn't control. The tenants who vanished were said to be the result of his failed experiments. Armed with this unsettling knowledge, I returned home. The building's history explained a lot, but it didn't make me feel any safer. That night, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. I set up a camera in my bedroom, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural presence. If I could prove it was real, maybe I could find a way to stop it. As night fell, I felt the familiar sense of dread creeping in. I lay in bed, pretending to sleep, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up, I heard the whisper again. "Ethan." My heart pounded as I forced myself to stay still, listening. The whisper grew louder, closer, and then the shadow appeared, standing at the foot of my bed. I watched in horror as the shadow moved toward the camera. It reached out, and the camera flickered and died. The whispering stopped abruptly, and the room fell silent. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even breathe. The shadow loomed over me, its presence suffocating. Then, in a voice that sounded like 1,000 whispers, it spoke. "Leave this place, or suffer their fate." The lights flickered violently, and the shadow vanished, leaving me gasping for breath. The fear was overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't stay. I had to leave, but not without understanding what I was dealing with. The next morning, I packed a bag and decided to stay at a friend's place for a few days. I couldn't stay in that apartment another night. Before leaving, I checked the camera footage. To my horror, it showed a dark, amorphous shape hovering over me, reaching toward the camera before it cut out. There was no mistaking it, something malevolent was indeed watching me. But where could I go? And more importantly, how could I escape something that had already claimed so many lives? I needed help, someone who understood the paranormal. And I knew just the person to call. I called an old friend, Jessica, who had always been interested in the paranormal. She had a knack for finding answers where others saw only darkness. She agreed to meet me that afternoon, her curiosity piqued by my strange experience. As I waited for her, I couldn't shake off the dread that had settled in my bones. The shadow, the whispers, the sense of being watched, it all seemed too real, too terrifying to ignore. Jessica arrived with a backpack full of equipment, her eyes wide with concern. "Ethan, what happened to you?" she asked, her voice filled with urgency. I led her to the living room, where I showed her the footage from the camera. She watched in silence, her expression growing more serious with every passing second. "This is intense," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to get to the bottom of this, and fast." We decided to visit the local historical society to dig deeper into the building's past. Jessica had a knack for finding hidden details, and together we combed through old records, journals, and photographs. The more we uncovered, the more disturbing the story became. Samuel Grady's obsession with the occult was well documented. His basement was rumored to be a place of dark rituals, where he sought to communicate with otherworldly beings. The disappearances in the 1960s seemed to be linked to his experiments. The missing tenants were never found, their fates sealed by the darkness he had summoned. As we pored over the documents, a faded photograph caught my eye, a picture of a young woman, her face etched with fear. Beneath it was a name, Emily Mills. According to the notes, Emily had been one of Samuel Grady's tenants and had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her story was hauntingly similar to mine, with reports of strange noises, shadows, and whispers. Jessica's eyes widened as she read the details. "Ethan, I think you're dealing with the spirits of those who were trapped here by Samuel Grady's dark magic. They're trying to warn you, just like they were trying to warn Emily." We decided to visit the basement, the heart of Samuel Grady's sinister experiments. Armed with flashlights and an EVP recorder, we descended into the darkness. The air grew colder with each step, the musty smell of decay and old wood filling our nostrils. The basement was a maze of shadows, the walls covered in strange symbols and markings that looked like ancient runes. Jessica's EVP recorder crackled to life, and we both froze as a voice, faint and distorted, echoed through the speakers, "Leave now, while you still can." Fear gnawed at my insides, but I couldn't back down. I had to find out what was happening. As we moved deeper into the basement, we discovered a hidden door, its frame covered in cobwebs and dust. Jessica hesitated but then nodded, her determination matching mine. We pushed the door open, revealing a small, cramped room with a single, flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. On the walls were more symbols, and in the center of the room was an old, tattered book, its pages yellowed with age. Jessica picked up the book, her eyes scanning the cryptic text. "This is a spell book," she murmured. "These are the rituals Samuel Grady used. It's all here, the incantations, the symbols, everything." Her voice trembled with the weight of the discovery. "Ethan, we need to end this. We have to break the curse before it's too late." As the realization sank in, the room seemed to close in around us. The air grew heavier, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "They're here," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. "They don't want us to leave. They don't want us to break the curse." Suddenly, the light bulb flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. The whispers turned into screams, the shadows swirling around us like a living, breathing entity. I could feel their presence, cold and suffocating, pressing in on us from all sides. Jessica clung to my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Ethan, we have to get out of here," she shouted, her voice breaking. But before we could move, a cold hand gripped my shoulder, and the darkness swallowed us whole. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my apartment, sprawled on the floor with Jessica beside me. The air felt thick with an unseen presence, and a chill ran down my spine. The basement, the shadows, the whispers, it all felt like a distant, terrifying dream, but the cold grip on my shoulder was a stark reminder that it was all too real. Jessica groaned and sat up, her eyes wide with fear. "Ethan, we need to end this. Now." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "We have to use the book," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "We have to perform a counter-ritual, something to break the curse." Jessica and I quickly retrieved the book from where it had fallen and spread it open on the floor. The pages were filled with arcane symbols and cryptic instructions, but Jessica, with her knowledge of the occult, began to decipher them. "This is it," she said, pointing to a page covered in dark, foreboding symbols. "This ritual should sever the ties between this world and whatever Samuel Grady summoned. We need candles, salt, and a personal item from the original tenants, something to connect us to their spirits." We gathered what we could find, candles from my kitchen, salt from the pantry, and a necklace I had found in the basement, which we assumed belonged to one of the missing tenants. As we prepared the ritual, the atmosphere in the apartment grew increasingly oppressive. The whispers returned, louder and more menacing, as if they sensed what we were about to do. "They're trying to stop us," Jessica said, her voice shaking. "We have to hurry." We arranged the candles in a circle, poured the salt around them, and placed the necklace in the center. Jessica began to chant the incantation from the book, her voice steady and strong despite the rising terror. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to deepen, closing in around us. The candles flickered wildly, their flames struggling against an unseen force. I joined Jessica in the chant, our voices merging as we called upon whatever powers could aid us. The air crackled with energy, and the whispers turned into screams of rage and despair. The shadows swirled around us, a chaotic storm of darkness and malice. Just when I thought we might be overwhelmed, there was a blinding flash of light, and the shadows recoiled, retreating into the corners of the room. A figure materialized in the center of the circle, its form shifting and flickering like a mirage. It was Emily Mills, her face a mask of sorrow and pain. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the dying echoes of the ritual. "You've set us free." Her form began to fade, and with it, the oppressive presence that had haunted the apartment. Jessica and I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The room felt lighter, the air clearer, as if a great weight had been lifted. "We did it," Jessica said, a faint smile on her lips. "We broke the curse." I nodded, but a sense of unease lingered. Something still didn't feel right. As we sat in the aftermath of the ritual, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface of the darkness that had enveloped this place. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and a cold breeze swept through the room. Jessica and I exchanged a terrified glance. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I think we missed something." Before I could respond, the apartment door slammed shut, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. The shadows began to coalesce in the center of the room, forming a dark, malevolent shape. It was Samuel Grady, his eyes burning with hatred and rage. "You cannot escape me," he hissed, his voice a chilling blend of anger and despair. "This place is mine, and you will suffer as they did." Jessica screamed, and we scrambled to our feet, but it was too late. Grady's shadowy form surged forward, engulfing us in darkness. The last thing I heard was his malevolent laughter, echoing in my mind as everything went black. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Cedar House Haunting. The decision to move into Cedar House was born out of necessity. The divorce had drained my finances, and this old, abandoned house was the best I could afford. Its reputation didn't bother me much. I didn't believe in ghosts. Besides, the idea of fixing up a place of my own was somewhat therapeutic. The house, with its creaky floorboards and peeling wallpaper, was an embodiment of a fresh start. However, from the moment I crossed the threshold, an unsettling chill crept into my bones. As I began unpacking, the sheer volume of forgotten belongings in the attic piqued my curiosity. Dust-covered trunks, old furniture, and an assortment of knickknacks lay scattered, telling tales of the previous owners. Among these, a weathered leather-bound diary caught my eye. It lay atop a pile of yellowing newspapers, its lock broken and pages brittle with age. My fingers tingled as I picked it up, the leather cold and worn. Settling on an old armchair, I opened the diary, revealing elegant, faded handwriting. The entries were mundane at first, recounting the daily life of Eleanor Smith, the former lady of the house. She described her family, their routines, and the occasional town gossip. But as I read on, the tone of the diary changed, growing darker with each entry. Eleanor's words became desperate, filled with fear and confusion. June 15th, 1924, something is wrong with this house. I hear noises at night, footsteps echoing in the attic. But when I check, there's nothing there. I fear I am losing my mind. A shiver ran down my spine. I glanced around the attic, half expecting to see a ghostly figure watching me. Shaking off the eerie feeling, I continued reading. The entries grew more frantic, Eleanor describing shadows that moved on their own and whispers in the dead of night. She wrote of sleepless nights and the dread that consumed her, culminating in a final, chilling entry. July 22nd, 1924, I cannot take it anymore. The footsteps are louder now, coming closer. I hear them even as I write this. There is no one else in the house. I am alone. But I am not alone. They are here with me. The diary ended abruptly, the last sentence trailing off into an ink blotch. My heart pounded in my chest as I closed the book, the air in the attic growing heavier. I felt a presence, an unseen weight pressing down on me. Every creak of the house seemed magnified, each sound a harbinger of something sinister lurking in the shadows. Unable to shake the growing unease, I decided to leave the attic and head back downstairs. As I turned to go, a soft thud echoed through the room, like a footfall. I froze, my breath hitching. Slowly, I turned around, scanning the dimly lit attic. Nothing. It was just my imagination, I told myself, gripping the diary tightly. I rushed downstairs, my heart still racing. The house felt different now, its once comforting silence now a source of dread. I had to find out more about Eleanor Smith and what happened to her. Maybe the town's records held some answers. But for now, I needed to calm down and convince myself that ghosts weren't real. As I placed the diary on the kitchen table, another noise echoed from above, a deliberate, echoing step. I spent the next day at the local library, determined to uncover the mystery of Eleanor Smith. The librarian, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a curious nature, was more than willing to help once I mentioned the house. Cedar House, you say? It's been empty for years. Many believe it to be haunted. Strange things happen there, she murmured, leading me to a dusty archive room. We found old newspapers and town records, and as I pored over them, a tragic story began to unfold. Eleanor Smith had been a well-respected woman in the community, known for her kindness and grace. However, in the summer of 1924, her demeanor changed. Neighbors reported seeing her wandering the streets at odd hours, muttering to herself about shadows and whispers. The townsfolk whispered about her losing her sanity, but no one could explain the strange occurrences at Cedar House. Then, one day in late July, Eleanor disappeared without a trace. Her husband, who had been away on business, returned to find the house empty. A frantic search ensued, but Eleanor was never found. The official record listed her as missing, presumed dead. Her disappearance left a dark stain on Cedar House, and the property changed hands several times before being abandoned. Returning home with this new knowledge, I felt a mix of dread and determination. The diary had to hold more clues. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the diary open before me. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed something I had missed before, sketches in the margins. They were rough and frantic, depicting shadowy figures and indistinct faces. One drawing caught my eye, a figure standing at the top of the attic stairs, its face obscured by darkness. A sudden chill filled the room, and I heard a faint whisper, like a breath against my ear. "Get out," it seemed to say. My heart pounded as I scanned the empty kitchen, the shadows deepening with the setting sun. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as my imagination running wild. But the feeling of being watched persisted, an oppressive weight that grew with each passing minute. Desperate for answers, I decided to spend the night in the attic. If Eleanor had documented her experiences, perhaps I could experience them too. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of resolve, I ascended the creaky stairs. The attic was colder than the rest of the house, the air thick with dust and something more, an intangible sense of dread. I set up a chair in the center of the room, the diary on my lap. The minutes dragged by, each creak of the house sending shivers down my spine. Hours passed with nothing but silence. Just as I was beginning to question my sanity, I heard it, a soft, deliberate footstep from the far corner of the attic. My flashlight beam trembled as I directed it towards the sound. The shadows seemed to shift and dance, but nothing was there. Suddenly, the temperature dropped further, my breath visible in the frigid air. The footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing in the confined space. Panic gripped me, but I stayed put, determined to uncover the truth. The attic door creaked open slowly, as if pushed by an unseen hand. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. In the pitch black, the footsteps stopped right in front of me. I could feel a presence, cold and malevolent, standing inches away. The air grew heavy, and a whisper, unmistakable this time, filled my ears, "Leave this place." My resolve shattered. I bolted from the attic, stumbling down the stairs. I fled the house, not stopping until I was outside, gasping for breath. The diary still clutched in my hand. I knew I couldn't abandon the house just yet. Eleanor's spirit was reaching out, and I had to find a way to help her before it was too late. After my terrifying experience in the attic, I knew I couldn't stay in Cedar House alone. I reached out to my friend Laura, a local historian and a firm believer in the supernatural. Laura arrived the next morning, armed with a bundle of sage, a tape recorder, and a stack of old books. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and concern as she surveyed the house. "You weren't kidding," she said, running her fingers along the spine of the diary. "This place has a heavy energy. Let's see what we can uncover." We decided to conduct a seance in the attic that night, hoping to communicate with Eleanor's spirit. As the sun set, the house grew eerily quiet, the shadows lengthening with the fading light. Laura set up candles in a circle and instructed me to sit opposite her, the diary between us. We held hands, and Laura began to chant softly, invoking a protective circle. The temperature dropped again, and the air grew thick with tension. The flame of the candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. A sudden, sharp knock echoed through the attic, followed by a soft, mournful wail. My heart pounded, but I squeezed Laura's hand, determined to see this through. "Eleanor, if you are here, please show us a sign," Laura called out, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The attic remained silent for a moment, then a faint scratching sound filled the air. It grew louder, coming from the walls and the floor beneath us. The diary suddenly flew open, the pages flipping rapidly before stopping on an entry I hadn't read before. The words seemed to glow in the candlelight. "July 21st, 1924, they are coming for me. I have seen their faces, dark and twisted. They whisper my name, urging me to join them. I am so frightened. If anyone finds this, please help me. I do not want to be one of them." The room grew colder, and I felt a presence pressing down on me. Laura gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "We need to help her move on," she whispered. "She's trapped here by whatever is haunting this house." We continued our seance, calling out to Eleanor and urging her to find peace. The scratching intensified, and the footsteps returned, pacing around us in a slow, deliberate circle. My breath hitched as I saw a shadowy figure materialize in the corner of the attic. It was tall and indistinct, its face a swirling mass of darkness. "Eleanor, you are not alone," Laura cried out. "We are here to help you. Show us how to free you from this place." The figure moved closer, its presence overwhelming. A cold hand brushed my cheek, and I felt a surge of despair so intense it nearly brought me to tears. The attic filled with whispers, a cacophony of voices blending into an indecipherable murmur. Then, a single word cut through the noise, clear and desperate: "Key." Laura and I exchanged glances, our fear momentarily eclipsed by determination. "There must be a key somewhere," she said, her voice shaking. "Something that can unlock whatever is binding Eleanor here." We spent the next few days searching every inch of the house, looking for anything that resembled a key. It was Laura who finally found it, hidden in a secret compartment behind an old portrait in the living room. The key was small and ornate, its surface etched with strange symbols. That night, we returned to the attic with the key in hand. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, the air humming with unseen energy. As we held the key aloft, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the candles, plunging us into darkness. A soft, ghostly glow illuminated the attic, revealing Eleanor's spectral form standing before us. Her eyes were filled with gratitude and sorrow as she pointed to the far corner of the attic. We followed her gaze and found a small, locked chest buried under a pile of old blankets. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The chest sprang open, revealing a collection of old letters and a locket. As I touched the locket, a wave of warmth spread through the room, and Eleanor's form grew brighter. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have freed me." The attic filled with light, and the oppressive presence lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. Eleanor's form dissolved into the light, and she was gone. But as the light faded, the shadows began to stir once more, hinting at an even darker force yet to be reckoned with. With Eleanor freed, I expected the oppressive atmosphere in Cedar House to lift entirely, but an uneasy tension remained. It was as if the very walls of the house were holding their breath, waiting for something. Laura and I sat in the kitchen, the locket and letters spread out before us. The old correspondence painted a picture of Eleanor's life, but there was one letter that stood out, its paper yellowed with age and its ink smeared as if written in a hurry. My dearest Eleanor, I fear the darkness that looms over our home. The entity that has attached itself to this place grows stronger each day. I can hear its whispers in the night, urging me to leave, but I cannot abandon you. I have hidden the key to its power in the attic. If anything happens to me, you must find it and destroy it. Only then will you be free. Forever yours, Thomas. Laura read the letter aloud, her voice trembling. Thomas knew about the entity. He tried to protect Eleanor, but he never got the chance to destroy it. A sudden, heavy thud echoed from the attic, shaking the house. The entity, no longer restrained by Eleanor's presence, was making itself known. Laura and I exchanged a look of grim determination. We had freed Eleanor, but our work was far from over. We armed ourselves with the essentials, salt, sage, and a couple of old iron rods, hoping these traditional protections would be enough. The climb to the attic felt like ascending into the heart of darkness itself. The air grew colder with each step, the shadows deepening unnaturally. As we reached the attic, a malevolent force seemed to press down on us. The darkness was so thick it felt almost tangible. We formed a protective circle with the salt, lighting the sage to purify the space. The entity's presence was palpable, a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to absorb the light from our candles. Show yourself, Laura commanded, her voice echoing through the attic. The shadows coalesced into a towering figure, its form shifting and indistinct. Red eyes glowed from within the darkness, filled with malice and hunger. The entity let out a guttural growl, the sound reverberating through the room. It lunged at us, but the salt barrier held it back, its form recoiling as if struck. Laura began chanting an incantation, her words a mix of Latin and English, calling upon protective forces to aid us. The entity thrashed and screamed, the sound piercing my ears. It clawed at the barrier, its form growing more frantic. I grabbed the iron rod and, with a deep breath, stepped outside the circle. The entity turned its focus to me, its eyes burning with rage. I swung the rod, the iron slicing through the darkness, causing the entity to howl in pain. Keep it distracted, Laura shouted, continuing her incantation. I swung again, each strike weakening the entity. The shadows began to dissipate, the entity's form flickering like a dying flame. But it wasn't enough. We needed something more, a final act to banish it completely. I remembered the locket, still in my pocket. Pulling it out, I held it up, the entity recoiling from its light. Thomas's love protected Eleanor, I shouted. Let it protect us now. The entity screamed, a sound of pure agony, as the locket's light grew brighter. The shadows writhed and twisted, the entity's form disintegrating into the air. With a final, ear-splitting shriek, the entity exploded into a cloud of darkness, which dissipated into the air. The attic fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting instantly. Laura and I collapsed to the floor, our breath coming in ragged gasps. We had done it. The darkness was gone, banished by the light of Thomas's love and our determination. As we sat in the aftermath, a sense of peace settled over Cedar House. The house, once a place of fear and torment, felt lighter, almost welcoming. We gathered the remnants of our tools and made our way downstairs, exhausted but victorious. A week later, I stood in the front yard, watching as the first rays of sunlight bathed Cedar House in a warm glow. The spirits had found their peace, and so had I. The house was no longer a place of darkness, but a beacon of hope and renewal. As I turned to leave, I felt a gentle breeze and heard a soft whisper in my ear, "Thank you." Smiling, I walked away from Cedar House, ready to start a new chapter of my life, free from the shadows of the past. The end. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.